this tutorial, I'm going to help you be able to answer any exam question that is focused on explaining the formation of a Corrie, which you can see on the revision checklist here. Okay, now to answer this question, there's two approaches. You can write your answer, or you can draw a diagram which contains the key points in the formation of this particular feature. It depends on the wording of the question, so pay attention to the question when you're reading it, and if it says you must use a diagram, then make sure you draw the diagram that goes with what you're writing, or if it just says you may use a diagram, then you're not required to use a diagram. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to say is in your answer, and by the way, what's really important in answering this question is that you follow a sequence. We can see a sequence of diagrams here. So here's diagram number 1, diagram number 2, and diagram number 3. And one thing leads to the next. So you should start by saying, and the first point you'd want to make is that a glacier forms high in the mountains in a hollow. Now you can go on to say another point, which is the reason for this is that it is much colder higher in the mountains. You could also add an additional point, which says this hollow is often north-facing because north-facing sides of mountains never see the sun and therefore the snow is less likely to melt. But that's not required, that's an additional point, and a higher student might answer that, but somebody doing National 5 writing this answer might avoid that point. Okay, the next step you want to go on to, before actually talking about what the glacier is doing in the hollow, is actually tell us how a glacier forms. So here we have a glacier, and a glacier forms by snow falling on the ground and not melting in summer. And then the following winter, more snow falls onto the ground and on top of the snow that fell from the year before. Now what happens to the first layer of snow from the year before is it now starts to get compressed by the layer of snow higher up. And then the following year, the snow fails to melt in the summertime, and then during wintertime, more snow falls, further compressing the snow. When this goes on for year after year, your bottom layers of snow will compress into ice because of the weight of the snow above. And the glacier will gradually get bigger and bigger the more the snow falls. Now that's an awful lot to say, so you're probably just going to want to say a glacier forms by layers of snow falling and compressing into ice. And that would be your second point. We've now got to the point where we have a glacier in our hollow. So we've talked about the glacier forming high in the mountains because it's colder up there in a hollow, and that the glacier forms because snow piles up layer upon layer year after year. What we now need to say is the glacier starts moving due to its own weight. And it moves in what's called rotational slip. It's also, that means it's actually rotating in the Corrie. You could add that to the point of rotational slip. It's also moving because of gravity pulling it down out of the mountains. Okay, so some idea that the glacier is moving, you might add the idea that it's moving in a circular fashion because of rotational slip, but it's also moving due to gravity with the weight of the glacier pulling it out of the mountains. That needs one sentence written about it. Okay, at this point, I want you just to pause and repeat the three ideas, maybe bullet point them. Glacier forming in a hollow high in the mountains. This is because it's much colder up there. Second point, glacier forms by layers of snow falling and never melting and gradually compressing into ice over many years. Third point is glacier starts to move due to its own weight because of gravity and due to this process known as rotational slip. Okay, your next point is that as it moves, it causes two processes of erosion. These are abrasion, you're going to want to write that, and plucking, which we can see up here. Now at this point, at National 5, if you weren't to go any further, you would be okay, but I would still recommend you write what a high student might write, which is what do these two terms mean? Okay, so abrasion is where rocks carried by the glacier scrape along the bedrock as the glacier moves. So rocks that are frozen into the base of the glacier are scraping along the bedrock of the mountain and hollowing the mountain out. So down here we can see these rocks are held at the base of the glacier and they're scraping against the mountain itself. So that's abrasion. Plucking is actually often how those rocks enter the glacier, and this is where rocks, the glacier freezes around them, freezes itself to rock and rips the rock up. So they're connected. Rock, when the glacier freezes to the rock, it rips the rock up, and the rock is then contained in the glacier here. And as the glacier moves, it scrapes that rock along the base of the mountain, hollowing the mountain out further. So we can see here, our little hollow has now become a much deeper hollow because of plucking and abrasion. So if we just think of our thoughts, we've got the hollow in the mountain, we've got the glacier forming, we've got the glacier moving, we've now got, as it moves, two processes of erosion, plucking and abrasion, deepening the hollow. Right, that brings us to the final step, which is at the end of the Ice Age, the glacier melts because of warming temperatures. We now want to describe what's left behind. So here we have a corrie, and what we can see that's left behind, first of all, is a very steep back wall. That's this bit here. Two steep sides, like here, which actually forms a kind of armchair shape. So here we have the two arms, and here we have the back of the chair, and an over-deepened hollow. And you might then go a bit further and say this hollow is often full of water with a small round lake, which we can see here, which is known as a tarn. Okay, and that brings us to the entire answer. If you were to draw a diagram, you might draw something like this. What's key in a diagram is that you write annotations rather than labels. So if we have a look here, this is an annotation. We have abrasion, but we don't know what abrasion is. So we're not going to get any further credit for saying what abrasion is beyond mentioning abrasion. Whereas up here, we have the idea of plucking. Rocks were plucked. And we have a full description of what that's happened because ice has frozen to the rock. Therefore, we would get a mark up here both for naming plucking, but also for saying what plucking was. So if you're going to draw a diagram and add in your ideas to the diagram, then make sure they're written out as sentences. So here we have freeze thaw, where rock is breaking off the mountain and rolling into the glacier because water gets into cracks and expands at night when it freezes, and that causes the cracks to further develop and eventually the rocks break off. That is a process, by the way, that you can add into your answer. Okay, you can entirely draw a diagram with all the points I've already made in your diagram as labels and not write a single sentence if you choose. One final skill that you're going to need is that you will need to be able to identify one of these features on an Ordnance Survey map, and you'll find under the map skills section of the revision site tutorials that will help you do that.